Welcome back to Building on a Budget Models. I'm Thomas. This is the fifth part of the McLaren Honda Mp4 1/20th scale build from Tamiya. First thing I'm going to do is paint the brake discs and calipers. I looked at some pictures of the real ones because I wasn't happy with the colours suggested by the instructions. I used some anthracite matte for the discs, aluminium flat for the calipers, and a bit of gold mixed with silver for the central hubs. Also, once fitting the brakes into place, I also tested the wheels again to make sure that I had threaded them well. All four brakes are the same, and there's a small tab at the top to make sure that you fit them in correctly. The fit is snug and you didn't need any glue to get them in place. Just be very gentle with the suspension arms. Having the screws is a really good way of fitting the wheels. It means that you can remove them without too much difficulty. It's also important to test that these steering arms work. Now, I bought this Hobby Design stencil for the Goodyear logos, and I taped it as I had seen demonstrated. However, my feeling is that these are designed for use with an airbrush, not with a spray can, as I tried it 3 times, but every time I found that there was overspray and it looked messy. Therefore I used some thinner on the end of a cotton bud to wipe away the markings before they'd dried. I even tried once taping it on and then using a little bit of white paint on the end of a brush, but this just ended up looking a real mess. Please let me know if you think I'm going wrong somewhere with this. Now, I then decided to fit the wheels, which I'd done in semi-gloss black. These all went in very nicely. I decided to do this before the decals, as sometimes you can damage the decals while pushing them into the wheels. I used some 400 grit sandpaper to get rid of the seam in the middle and also roughen them up to make them look a little bit like they had been used. Now, the MSM Creations decals also have these 2 decals here that go inside the wheels, which don't come with the set that Tamiya have provided. I also used the MSM Creations Goodyear Eagle decals for the wheels. I did one side and then let them to dry overnight before moving on to the other side. All these decals are identical. There's no difference between the front wheels and the rear wheels. I applied a little bit of micro sol to these to help them adhere to the tyre as well as possible. I then moved on to the photo etch parts for the front and rear wing. The instructions recommend using pins to fit these vertical parts onto the plastic. However, I found that if I sanded the pins on the existing part to be slightly narrower, they would fit in quite nicely. I used some CA superglue gel to glue these into place. It was very important to get this as symmetrical as possible. Pretty happy with that. After it had dried for a little while, I then applied the Goodyear decals to the sides. Once these had dried for a day, I'll come back to them and add some clear lacquer. When it came to assembling the rear wing, I put down this Christmas napkin that I had left over to protect it from the surface. I also decided to wear some vinyl gloves. There are small tabs on the sides of the vertical parts to fit this large horizontal piece into place. I gave it a test fit before then using some super glue gel again to assemble it. It's very important to look at these pieces closely when assembling them to make sure that you're getting the angles all right. I decided to sand away some of the pinpoints here so that it could just be put into place and then held in place using the glue rather than the pins. Pretty happy with that, and it also seems symmetrical. When I'd made sure that the glue had dried, I then moved on to doing the decals. Here again you can see the 12 showing that this is Senna's car. This went nicely onto both sides, providing a really nice contrast to the bright red. There were two choices for the Showa logo underneath, one that was all in white and the other with a black border. As far as I could tell, the one with the black border was used later in the season, so I chose this all white logo. These rear wing parts are curiously sparse when it comes to logos. The Marlboro logo for the top of the rear wing was split into 4 sections. It's very important to get it all lined up. Microsole is used here to help it adhere to the curves as well as possible. I'm pretty happy with how this looks. The Marlboro logo on the rear wing was actually slightly too big, so I gave it a horizontal cut so that it would fit over the gap. There were then 2 fluorescent red Marlboro chevrons which went either side. After letting the decals set for a day, I gave them 3 coats of Mr. Super Clear UV cut and let them rest for about a week. I had very kindly been given a free driver figure, so I was now going about making them look as much like Ayrton Senna as I could. I also bought some decals from MSM Creations and looked at real examples of his 1988 race suit. First thing I did was remove his head and then painted his body in Revell matte red called Carmine Rot. I found these chest decals too large and I used the back ones for the kind of abdomen area instead. These decals were intended for a standing figure. I used some of the smaller logos for the chest and left some out. They were going to go over the seatbelt straps, and then once they were dry I would repaint the seatbelt straps over the top of them, as you can see here with this Honda logo. This Nacional one was quite difficult as it went near the belt, so I gave the bottom of it a trim slightly. Fortunately, his name and the OMP logo and the Brazilian flag actually fit really nicely around his waist, and I only had to paint over some of it. Pretty happy with that so far. Once it dried, I then used some matte black acrylic and went over where the raised seatbelts were. It's pretty good, I think. I then coloured the seatbelt buckles in silver And now I moved on to the helmet, which was done in gloss yellow. Some peach skin tones and semi-gloss black were used around the visor area. These decals can be used for any of his McLaren race suits, and they provide logos for Honda as well as Ford, as well as other sponsors that were used by McLaren at the time. Started on his helmet with the blue and green horizontal stripes. These were a bit fiddly, but I think I got there in the end. They didn't quite meet up around the back, but they're more or less straight. Again, microsole was used here to help them adhere as best as possible. I usually start with the larger decals with jobs like this. I then moved on to the other logos, starting with this Marlboro logo which went over the front. There were then 3 Nacional Bank logos, 2 on either side at the top and 1 around the chin area. These have all been done in such a way so that they curve really nicely around the shape of the helmet. There were then 2 Boss logos just underneath the cheek area. Pretty happy with that. Still keeps its glossy shine. Had this plastic blister from a Loctite superglue gel set, and I noticed that the kind of shape of the plastic at the bottom was a very similar curve to the shape of the helmet. So I put some aside. I then did the Boss logos that went on top of the seat belts. Once this had dried, I then coated it in some matte clear. With the decals and the clear gloss on the helmet now cured, I then tested the plastic. I also needed to do his facial details, so I looked at pictures. He had brown eyes and brown hair. Used a little bit of white on the end of a cocktail stick to do the whites of his eyes, before using an even thinner point of brown to do his eyebrows and his eyes, which were visible. Once this was dry, I then added a little bit of matte clear just to dull it down a little bit and provide a contrast to the helmet. I trimmed the visor to match the shape of a real one and then test fitted it using the tweezers to help. I used some PVA glue to glue it onto either side, holding it briefly to keep it in place. The Honda visor decal really finished this off. Just a little bit of adjustment. I was really pleased with how this looked. And here he is assembled. Hasn't got the arms yet, but I'll finish those pretty soon. I fitted the tyres here. Well, actually they're not screwed on. Just gives you an idea what Senna looks like in the chassis so far. And here's the car without him in. You can still see the belts. Really happy with how this helmet has turned out. I think that's a really good finish with the mask. Thanks for watching. Please do comment, like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.